So the thing is, when it comes to the videos and me going out and driving cars, I do a huge amount of research before I get there. But generally, I forgot half of what I've learned, and some might say maybe I forget everything when it comes to filming the cars, and that I'm maybe lacking a little bit in attention to detail. The other problem is that when it comes to editing down the videos, a lot of what I say and a lot of what goes into it, it gets cut for one reason or another, and it just doesn't make the final edit. So I'd like to use these videos to maybe address the depth of knowledge that goes into some of the videos. Okay, so let's get on with it. We're going to have a little deeper look at the history of the car that put Toyota, in my opinion, on the map in Ireland, and that's the third generation Toyota Corolla, also known as the KE30. To say luck was on Toyota's side when the Mark III Corolla was launched is a complete understatement. Here you had this little upstart from Japan, making these little weird, small, rust-prone cars, but it was about to hit the big time with this gem, okay? In Ireland, this was a very difficult time, marked by strikes, fuel shortages, and pretty much general malaise in the economy and high immigration. Anyway, back to the Corolla. Launched in August 1974, right on the eve of the oil crisis. And for the Corolla, it was a case of right place and right time for this little petal of a car. And for those not in the know, that's actually what Corolla means. It means a ring of petals, which you'd see on a flower. Apparently, the name was supposed to evoke thoughts of beautifully styled, eye-catching sports car. I guess that's marketing speak from the 1970s, but marketing speak doesn't change because some might say it's a load of bollocks. But anyway, I'm digressing a little bit from what I'm here to talk about. The Corolla launched in 1974, right into the oil crisis and a massive worldwide recession, but it was about to become a massive hit for Toyota. And why? Why was it going to be this huge hit? Well, here you had an affordable, fuel-efficient family car with the added bonus of being reliable. Yes, every single morning you could go out, put the key in your Corolla, and it would start. And that was not the same for a lot of other cars, especially from Europe and America. So this was a feat largely unmatched at the time by the biggest car manufacturers like Leyland, Chrysler, General Motors, Ford, Renault, Fiat, and so on and so forth. They all felt it was fully acceptable that given a car was made up of thousands of parts, some quite small, some quite big, inevitably some of them would fail from time to time. So it was very common for most car owners to be able to work on their cars at the time and to be able to rebuild carburetors and so on and so forth. I'm sure some of you watching this video right now are thinking rebuilding the carburetor is the easiest thing in the world, and other people are wondering what a carburetor is. So imagine right now if you could go out and Toyota or Renault or whoever fully expected you to be able to fix your new car in 2021 on your driveway with a couple of basic tools. Wouldn't happen. However, Toyota believed in what was called the Kaizen approach, whichever way you want to pronounce it, to manufacturing, where it was the responsibility of everybody in the organization to find ways of doing things better and more effectively or more efficiently all of the time. So this helped keep costs down within the organization. It also ensured that the cars were constantly getting better built, okay, that there was constant improvement, and it was across the organization. So it wasn't just one branch or one unit, everybody was constantly taking this approach. And to this day, it's still actually the approach taken in Toyota. So very honourable, they take a very long-term view to things. So in fact, they were so ambitious with this drive to improve their design techniques that the Corolla, the KE30, was the first car built by Toyota to be wind tunnel tested. And this no doubt helped in making it economical and refined when it was being driven. So the KE30 was also the longest lived single generation of Corolla ever. As said, it started production in August 1974 and it finished in July 1981. And the generations which followed had 4-year production cycles, which were used by Toyota to quickly improve the quality of their models up to the release of the 7th generation of the Corolla in 1991, which was produced itself until 1997. And that's where they kind of started to stretch out the production cycles of the cars. A similar strategy was also followed by those of you who can remember Hyundai launching in the 1990s here in Ireland and in the UK. They had a string of new Accents, Lantras, Elantras, and so on and so forth, Sonatas, and they very quickly improved the quality and upped the game of the cars. Anyway, back to the KE30. which in Ireland was offered initially with a tax-friendly 1.2 litre engine, and then that evolved into a 1.3 litre engine after the facelift in 1977, which also brought about an improved interior. So the facelift mainly consisted of a new dashboard on the inside. It was available as a saloon with 2 and 4 doors and an estate body. There was also a 2-door Sprinter or a 3-door Sprinter, depending on the way you want to look at it, which was offered, but I was unable to confirm if that was offered here in Ireland or not. So maybe somebody could bloop and let us know in the comment section about that. Also, like later models, the Toyota Corolla was also offered as the Daihatsu Charmant. And a little interesting side note, the current Corolla is also offered as a Suzuki. I know the name was inspired by Patrick Swayze, but I can't remember the exact name. It's after going out of my mind right now. But anyway, that happens. Such is life. Now, back to that 1.3 litre engine, which was fitted to later models also. The 1.2 was carried over from the KE30, which is the previous generation Corolla, or the Mark II Corolla. The 1.3 itself, which is probably the more popular and well-known engine in Ireland, came initially with about 58 horsepower, and it was fully carbureted in the KE30 Corolla. But in later models, it became fuel injected, and obviously performance and reliability improved along the way as well. That engine lasted right up to 1989 in the Corolla, and it helped to forge Toyota's reputation for ruggedness and economy. Its inline layout also helped to make it easier to maintain, with good access all around to the engine and good underbonnet access as well. Now, I'm told by somebody who essentially trained on those cars and who used to work on them, and who also went on to work for another major motoring manufacturer and assembler in Canada, that Toyota had, when the Corolla was new, Toyota initially had huge success because of one single thing. Really, in the grand scheme of things, a cheap part, but they used to fit a high quality inline fuel filter where other manufacturers didn't. Now, supposedly the person told me this meant that dirt and water and moisture and all those little contaminants never actually made it to the carburetor, which helped the car to run better. He said it also made sure that in the mornings the car would start easier. Now, I don't know if that's true, but he insisted it was. He said it wasn't just an inline fuel filter, it was a really high quality inline fuel filter that was fitted, and it pretty much cleared up a lot of the starting issues and running issues that other manufacturers had. Now, if anyone wants to confirm that or let me know in the comments, please do. It would be great to hear if that's true or not. There was also a racing version, believe it or believe it not, of that 1.3 litre engine developed by TRD, which kicked out 180 horsepower. But this was never offered outside of Japan. But if you can imagine the little KE30 with 180 horsepower, you can imagine what that car, and rear wheel drive just add, you can imagine what that car was like. Car weighing about 800 kgs, it was probably a bit of fun, let's be honest about it. It hasn't stopped people also modifying the few cars that are left to fit more powerful engines. So again, so they can go around in circles and create smoke all day long and to their heart's content, okay? Anyway, back to the 70s. So if you bought one of these back new in the 1970s, what did you get? Well, you got very faux American styling, Coke bottle styling on the outside. So you can tell this car was clearly designed to crack the American market. It wasn't really aimed at Europe, which at the time was by far and away the biggest market in the world. Had a few fussy details on the outside, but overall it was a reasonably clean design for the time. Interior-wise, it was nicely laid out, the plastics were plentiful, and they weren't really anything worse than their competitors. Now, if you read contemporary articles, I found a few online and reviews and stuff like that, they complain that it's cheap, that it's thin. But I can absolutely assure you, I've owned an Aston Maxi, I've owned an Aston Marina, I've driven a couple of older Renaults from the 70s. It's no better, it's no worse. There was none of them particularly great. So unless you're comparing it to the likes of Mercs and stuff like that, listen, it was a cheap family car. It was rugged. It done what it needed to do. Anyway, you also got good shaped seats. They weren't perfect, but they were all right. They came with vinyl, and the material offered. There was also a material offered. Cars were spacious inside for the time, but listen, if you're comparing a modern Corolla and a Corolla from the 1970s, it's tiny. It really is actually small inside. But you have to remember, for the time, it was quite good. You also got a cigarette lighter, so you got some luxuries in there, and more importantly, you also got a radio, and it later came with a cassette player, which, believe it or not, was a pretty big luxury at the time. For the driver, the steering was very, very light. The 4-speed gearbox was really smooth, and the clutch was lovely and soft. And in fact, the car was barely noticeable to use. It wasn't particularly wasn't a challenge to drive. Now again, back to the 70s, for any of you who are familiar with cars from the 70s, a light clutch, light steering and light gearbox were pretty much unknown of at the time, especially in the European makes. Now, I've owned several cars from the 70s. I can categorically say, like, as a rule, you had heavy steering, you had a heavy clutch, you had rubbish brakes, and the gearbox, like I remember my Morris Marina, the gearbox was just a guessing game. You kind of pushed it and hoped it would go in somewhere, and you hoped there was a gear there, and you hoped it wouldn't grind, and that was pretty much it. Okay, and they made driving these cars on a daily basis, especially in heavy traffic, an absolute pain. But the Corolla was different. It was nice and light and easy to drive. You might say it was forgettable, but that was actually kind of the point. They didn't want it to be a harsh experience. Anyway, Toyota had gotten some of the basics spot on with this car, and it was meant to be easy and effortless to use. The model featured in the video is a Deluxe model, it's one of the last produced, and it featured newer styled backlights, and there was no plastic chrome surround on these, a newer style front grille, and a very nice C badge on the grille as well in blue, which was quite nice. The blue kind of gemstone tended to fall off though early on and pretty quickly, so it's actually kind of rare to see that still fitted. Other luxury items included were, believe it or believe it not, carpet, a clock, reclining seats, radio cassette as I've previously mentioned, with rear speakers I might add, a glove box, and ignition key lock. There's a little button you have to press to release the key, and I have no idea why that lock is there. Presumably it's to stop the key falling out as it gets a little bit worn. You also got mud flaps, radial tires, and these were pure luxury items in the 1970s, okay? Other things that helped to make this car a success here in Ireland was the availability of the cars when they were new. So they were imported in big numbers, they were stockpiled, and they were available to drive out of the garage within a day or two. And if you wanted a certain colour, a certain body style, it was all there and you could have it within days. It wasn't waiting around for weeks or months as there currently is. But back in the 70s, it could be waiting around for weeks and months because the workers were on strike waiting to build your new car, or it could arrive half assembled or badly assembled, and so on and so forth. So on top of that, Toyota dealers in Ireland from the get-go had a full stock of spare parts. So everything was really easy to get. They came with a really good warranty. And that was pretty much what the Irish customer wanted. The cars just kept going, okay? And that was the great thing about them. The drawbacks. I'm getting an itchy nose. The drawbacks. Well, as I said, the interiors were a little cramped. The seats, while comfortable, they only had a basic shape. So on a long journey, they would get a little bit uncomfortable. The cars were also slow, and unless you really drove it on, it wasn't much to write home about, okay? And if you really drove it on, the rear end tended to get really bouncy because it was quite softly sprung, and it is a bit disconcerting, I'll be honest, when you drive them on. Finally, there was a huge issue of badge snobbery. So you have to understand, like Chinese cars right now, these were considered funny little cars from the East. They were light, they felt flimsy compared to the European and American cars. Pretty much all of the same criticism thrown at Korean cars in the 90s, Dacia in the noughties, and right now Chinese cars coming into the market were also thrown at Toyota. And so for most of the 70s, they weren't taken seriously by buyers or competitors. And finally, now we come to the Achilles heel of the KE30 Corolla. There's a very good reason why you rarely see them anymore. They rusted. And when I say they rusted worse than anything else on the road at the time. So worse than any Alfa, Lancia, Ford, Opel, Fiat, Lada, they rusted terribly. The engines and gearboxes and axles, they never wore out, they never broke. But by the time you'd wear them out, the body would have turned to dust before the car had hit 5 years old. And that was the issue with them. Okay, with later models, Toyota got on top of this problem, not before a hugely embarrassing episode here in Ireland with Irish assembled Starlets, whereby they had to rebuy all of them back and crush them, okay, or the vast majority of them. If you have one right now, they're really valuable, but they're really rare. But for the KE30, it was too late. It had been left to rust in peace by that time. With usual care and attention the Irish motorists afforded their cars back in the 1970s, you can expect that they were driven into the ground within a couple of years. The thing was, though, despite the lack of care, the lack of washing, the lack of attention they got as they kind of got a little bit older, they never broke down. And this is what kind of endeared them to the well-heeled Irish motorist of the 70s and 80s. Despite all the abuse hurled at them and lack of mechanical sympathy and maintenance, they just carried on regardless without complaint. The problem was that over time they just fizzed and melted back to the earth from which they came, okay? For those of you interested in buying a third generation Corolla, they do crop up in various states of repair. You would see them on Done Deal occasionally, but just be warned, check for rust. No matter how well it looks, just go and poke it, because there's rust everywhere, or can potentially be rust everywhere. An original Irish one in good condition will set you back. Listen, the market's gone funny. I haven't seen one up in a while, but I would not expect much change out of €10,000 if you had a good one, okay? And don't forget, we're in Ireland. We love our Toyotas here as a country. Alternatively, you could do what Ford Escort buyers are doing right now and head down to South Africa or Australia, where right-hand drive models in good condition, rust-free, can still be found at reasonable prices. So please bear that in mind. If you can do it, might be an idea. The Corolla KE30 set the benchmark for what was going to come from Toyota. That's what I firmly believe anyway. It became the best-selling car in terms of production numbers during the 1970s and went on to mark Toyota out as a serious manufacturer around the world. And even today, where everyone wants an SUV, the Corolla is so popular that 1 in 5 Toyotas still sold around the world is a Corolla. Anyway, listen, I've tried to do something different here today. I really hope you've enjoyed a little trip into history with the third generation of the Toyota Corolla. Let me know if there are any particular cars you'd like to see featured, and if you'd like me to go into the history of any cars in particular, or indeed if you want me to go into a history of a particular car and you own that car, that'd be even better. Send me a video of it. Tell me, listen, I'd like you to feature my car and talk about that brand or that particular model. I'd love to do it, okay? Listen, take care of yourself. Next week, we are going to have on, since we're talking Toyotas, a 1985 Toyota Corolla 2, and it is mint. I look forward to seeing you then, okay? Thank you very much. Bye-bye.